Elidor by Garner, 16, The Fix. Come for a walk, said David. It was the first time any of the children had spoken to Roland all day. Nicholas had gone off on his bicycle, Helen was careful to stay near her mother about the house, and David had been involved with his wireless textbooks. If you like, said Roland. They went down the road into Boundary Lane. They crossed the bridge, and then David went back over, stopped and crossed again. Okay, Roland, he said, you win. Oh, said Roland, do I? I know how you feel, said David, but there's no point in sulking. Things are too serious now. What do you mean now? All right, they always have been. Then what's made you change your mind today instead of last night, said Roland. Well, for one thing, said David, the cinders are all cut up by hoof marks on this side of the bridge, but not on the other. Even Nick would have to call that evidence. The unicorn broke through right here. So it was a unicorn, said Roland. Of course it was, said David, and we'll have to do something about it. I'm dead scared. I thought you agreed with Nick. I'd like to, said David, but there was something that didn't fit. It's been bothering me for weeks. It's that static electricity. You see, even if you believe the treasures are real and are generators, the static shouldn't be there, and it comes and goes. How do you know? Said Roland. Oh, I've been experimenting ever since Dad was on about his roses. It's there most days, early morning and dusk. You didn't tell me. I didn't want to, said David. Anyway, I think I know what's causing it. They're looking for the treasures in Elidor, and they've found them. Found them? Yes, it's quite simple. It's like getting a radio fix on a transmitter. You have two receivers from some distance apart, and they pick up the direction the signal's coming from. Then you draw two lines on a map, and where they cross is the transmitter. So what? Well, if the treasures are generating energy that's going through to Elidor, you should be able to get a fix on them in Elidor. Can't you see what happens next? They lay this fix, and when they go to the place where the lines cross, there's nothing there. They can point to a spot in the air or on the ground or anywhere and say, that's where the treasures are. But they can't touch them. You mean they can find the place in Elidor which coincides with our garden, but they can't get through, said Roland. Exactly. So what do? They keep trying to find the treasures, and they keep pouring energy into the same spot, like cracking a safe, but it's not going anywhere. There's this terrific charge keeps building up, and some of it leaks through to here as static electricity. If you say so, said Roland. But would they have the equipment to do it with? It didn't feel as if it's that kind of a place, really. I don't know, said David, but they're managing somehow. Could they do it with their minds, said Roland. That's how most things seem to work there. A sort of telepathy, said David. Yes, why not? All you'd need would be two people to lay the fix and... Two people? Cried Roland. Have you ever seen anything by the roses? No, said David. There's been this static. Listen, said Roland. We've got to prove it to the others once and for all. Now, while they're still jittery about last night, if I show you you're right, will you explain to Nick and Helen how it works? Yes, sure. It's only an idea, though. The details may be wrong. Come on. They ran back home. What are you going to do? Said David. Never mind, said Roland. I'll show you. If nobody knows beforehand, then Nick won't be able to talk so much about hallucinations. Nicholas was oiling his bicycle when they reached the cottage. David went inside for Helen. She came out looking apprehensive. The afternoon light was fading. Now then, said Roland. Last night. I don't want to talk about it, said Nicholas. Why not? I don't, that's all. Why is it so important for you to think Elidor isn't real, said Roland. I'll give you a thick ear in a minute, said Nicholas. What about you, Helen? Do you think we all imagined Elidor? Oh, please, Roland, let's not row about it, please. Yes, it's stupid to argue, said Nicholas. We can think what we like, but we're here now, and the treasures, even if they are treasures, are under the rose bush, and Elidor's finished. It's all over. That's where you're wrong, Nick, said David. You may have finished with Elidor, but Elidor's not finished with us. Whose side are you on? Said Nicholas. There aren't any sides, said David, not after last night. I can explain that, said Nicholas. And can you explain this? Roland had gone to the rose bed and was holding his hand near one of the bushes. They all heard the crack and saw the spark jump. This once, Nick, said David. Listen to Roland this once. If you're not convinced, I'll promise we'll not talk about it again. Oh, said Nicholas, anything for a quiet life. What's he going to do? I don't know. Again, Roland felt the charge as abruptly as if it had been switched on, and he arranged everybody in a tight group on the lawn facing the spot where the shadows had appeared. Can you feel the static electricity? He said. I don't like it, said Helen. It's giving me goose flesh. Watch the rose bed and keep watching, said Roland. Are you sure you know what you're doing? Said David. My neck's aching, said Helen. Don't move. Keep watching, said Roland. Oh, where are they? They must come. Nick's got to see them. It's static electricity, said Nick. It's happened before. You're telling me, said David, but it's getting stronger. I'm all pins and needles. We must be in some kind of energy field. Just once more, and never again. It was as strong as this last time. They must come. They must. That's it. There, look. The two shadows stood on the rose bed. You fool, groaned David. You've done it. Now it's the fix. But that's what I've always seen, said Roland. What about it, Nick? Go on, have a good look. You can walk round them. Nicholas made a strangled noise in his throat. Is this one of your hallucinations, eh? Said Roland, and tried to turn his head to see how Nicholas was reacting, but his neck muscles were locked. The shadows darkened. I can't move, said Helen. I can't move. Oh, my neck. It's all right, said Roland. They go away if you leave them. You cretin, said David. They're using us. Shut your eyes. Don't look. I can still see them. In my head, cried Helen. The air whined. The shadows were pools fringed with light. No longer in the garden, no longer anywhere, free of space. They had no depth and no end. I didn't mean it, said Roland. I only wanted to show you, so you'd know. He could hardly speak for the numbness that welled through him. His strength was being sucked out. Can't you stop them? Whimpered Helen. Oh, look, look. A white spot had appeared in the middle of each shadow, quivering like a focused beam of light. The spots grew, lessened their intensity, changed, congealed, and became the expanding forms of two men, rigid as dolls, hurtling toward the children. They matched the outlines of the shadows and were rising like bubbles to their surface. As they came nearer, their speed increased. They rushed upon the children and filled the shadows and eclipsed them. And at that instant, they lost their woodenness and stepped, two men of Elidor, into the garden. They were dressed in tunics and cloaks and carried spears. Shields hung on their backs. They were bewildered and stood as if they had woken in the middle of a dream. They both looked at the soil between them where the treasures were buried. There was no static electricity in the air, and the hold on the children had disappeared. The men lifted their eyes, stared round the garden, then ran across the lawn and swung themselves over the fence into the orchard next door. Helen, David, and Roland did not move, but Nicholas broke forward after the men. He snatched up stones and threw them wildly into the trees. He was sobbing. And that is the end of chapter 16.